Hi, everyone. Welcome to session 4C, Accelerating Digital Business with Data Sharing. I'm very happy to introduce our speaker for this session. Lydia Clougherty Jones is a Senior Research Director in the Data and Analytics Group at Gartner. Lydia covers data and analytics strategy, data value creation, and data monetization. She also covers data sharing, which is the topic of this session, open data, digital data ethics, privacy as business strategy, data for good, and blockchain smart contracts. Boy, Lydia, you must be tired at the end of the day. Lydia has over 20 years of business and legal experience helping Fortune 100 and 500 clients in the online commercial space navigate data collection and data sharing initiatives while complying with industry best practices. She is also an adjunct professor of law at Boston University and Vanderbilt University. Now, prior to joining Gartner, Lydia practiced law for over 20 years, and she was one of the first lawyers in the US to practice internet law. Predating the start of the dot-com era, she launched an internet law and online privacy practice group advising clients on data collection, sharing, and privacy issues, and using digital business alliances to increase revenue and growth opportunities. So I'm really looking forward to this session. So without further ado, Lydia, it is all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here with so many amazing speakers. It has been really fascinating to watch all of the activity on social media about this event. And I'm just so thankful to be able to be part of it. So without further ado, I'm Lydia Clougherty Jones, as you heard. I am a analyst and research director at Gartner, and I work with CDO leadership. So I work with chief data officers that are leaders of companies, nonprofits, governmental entities, and I have the pleasure of talking about all things data and data analytics and data sharing all day long. So today, I am really delighted to share with you the results of Gartner's 6th CDO survey, which is what we just published a few months ago. And I'm going to share all the high-level findings first, but also with a lens of data sharing. I cover data sharing and have introduced a model to help industry and governments and commerce and creating a win-win for businesses and citizens and consumers to use data not only responsibly, but to use data to generate business benefit or consumer benefit. And that's the second part of my talk today, is to talk about a data sharing model where we move away from don't share data and really talk about let's share data unless there's a reason not to. So what I'm hoping to combine here today is a narrative around the importance of accelerating digital business with data sharing, and also supported by our empirical evidence from our CDO survey, our 6th CDO survey. I also am leading the Gartner 7th CDO survey. So at the end of this talk, I will be talking a little bit about what we're hoping to do in the 7th CDO survey, and also invite all of you that are watching today to be a part of it. Lend us your voice. Tell us what you're thinking. We want to hear from you. And so I'm going to wrap up with some preview of what we're hoping to accomplish in the 7th CDO survey. So let's get started. So in our 7th CDO survey, we looked at 3 different questions. What's going on with digital transformation? What is the role of the CDO with respect to digital transformation? We also looked at what's the value of having business-facing KPIs? And then people versus tech. Which one is better? Which one helps the CDO become successful? And really, that's what the Gartner surveys are about. How can we help chief data officers and similarly titled roles, right? Because we know that the head of data and analytics is not always called the chief data officer, but you are doing the role of a chief data officer. So how can we help you be successful? What are your leadership skills that you need to hone in on? What are the technologies that you need to know about? And more importantly, how can you be the strong leader? What do you need to focus on? Because there's so many things. And when I take my inquiries with Gartner clients, I usually start with, let's prioritize. There's so much going on in every inquiry with clients that I've sort of become this best practice for me to say, okay, let's prioritize. Let's think about how can you as a chief data officer drive business value? How can we tighten that alignment? Because ultimately that is at the highest level, a successful chief data officer, right? Proving business benefit, measurable business benefit, or measurable economic success if you're in the commercial world. So let's look at those three. What did we look at? What we looked at was digital transformation initiatives. And are they widespread? Absolutely, yes. But who's leading it? And one of our really stark findings was that a quarter of our respondents were leading digital transformation initiatives, and 72% were leading or heavily involved. So what does that mean? What that means is that CDOs really do need to focus on how data and analytics is related to digital business. How do you clarify your executive accountability to actually drive both mandates? One of the things at Gartner that I cover, in addition to privacy and data sharing, is ethics. And we talk internally, is it data ethics? Is it digital ethics? Is it technology ethics? It's all combined, right? So as a leader, you really do need to think about your data analytics strategy connected not only to data, but to digital. We'll talk a little bit more about those findings in just a minute. Our second question we looked at is, how are CDOs who have business-facing KPIs faring? What about having multiple business partners? Does this help? And again, our goal is to create success factors. What does it mean to be a successful CDO today globally? What our survey found is that CDOs that had business-facing KPIs and multiple business partners were 1.7 times more likely to be effective. Effective at what? Producing clear business value, which is the linchpin to success, which means demonstrating return on investment from the data, from data and analytics strategy. What value are you contributing? So many times on inquiries, we talk to clients about their strategy and there's no metric of success. So it's really important as a chief data officer, data analytics leader charged with driving value from data to think about, how do I know that I'm doing a good job? Well, if you benchmark at the beginning, this is where we are with our data and analytics goals, right? With our business goals, how can we use data to advance those? Right? How are you going to measure success? That's really important to think about at the beginning, not at the end of planning your strategy. And what our survey showed is that those CDOs that were able to demonstrate ROI from their investments and ROI from their data monetization were more successful than those that didn't. And so what are our recommendations? Well, first on digital business, definitely clarify your interactions with your chief digital officer if there is one. If there isn't a chief digital officer at your organization, step up and try to fulfill that role. With respect to KPIs, what we found, and this is the data sharing lens, is that we saw improved value from D&A investments, not only from focusing on ROI, but from increasing data sharing. So those that were increasing data sharing were more successful. Those that were able to improve customer experience were more successful. Those that were using D&A in decision-making in a measurable way. Can you hear the theme here? The theme is about measurable, demonstrable ways of showing value in an objective way, right? Devoid of emotion and very much a narrative about how data is driving value, how data and analytics is driving value, how's data sharing driving value. And lastly, our third question that we were looking at in our 6th CDO survey was about people skills, people versus technology. And what we found was that people skills were paramount. 93% of CDO respondents reported effective communication being critical to success. It led to influence, engagement, and successes in ways that actually impacted business performance. And so investing in things like coaching, communication skills, and change management skills is absolutely paramount. So there's my overview of the 6th CDO survey. I'm going to dive a little bit more, though, into those findings before we get into data sharing. So what were the top areas of primary responsibility for chief data officers? Well, we looked at the same responses from 2019 compared to 2020. And in the Gartner survey, the top 2 were pretty much identical. So we were seeing defining and implementing strategy and oversight were the top areas of primary responsibility, as well as creating and implementing data governance and other kinds of master data management. Where we saw a diversion, though, was in the 4th highest level of primary responsibility. The focus on a DNA center of excellence, which we found last year, but not in prior years, really shows about how the CDO is moving more into that business side, thinking about how to tie having a data and analytics role more focused on business than on IT. IT is absolutely important. It is part of the relationship to have a successful CDO. But our research year over year over year has shown that those CDOs that are reporting in business or that are focusing on business strategy are more successful. So what actually, diving more into our 3 hypotheses, did we find? We found that the boundaries between CDOs and chief digital officers are blurred. CDOs are increasingly asked to take on these strategic objectives in leading digital transformation efforts. So what we are seeing is the boundaries between chief data and chief digital, unfortunately, both a D, right? Who's the CDO? So chief data officers, chief digital officers, responsibilities overlapping as digital business becomes business as usual. In some of our other surveys at Gartner, what we found from executives in our board of director surveys is that digital business was not only a top priority, but accelerating digital business was a top priority in our board of directors survey. We just published that survey, and it was nearly 70% of our board of director respondents said that digital business is important and accelerating digital business even more so. So it's really crucial to start talking about data and digital, not synonymously, but in tandem, right? Because they both can drive measurable value to your organization. So what are our recommendations here from this finding? It's all about being a leader and being engaged. You have to be engaged in digital transformation, being influential. We found that high performers were significantly more engaged in business models, in business strategy, in executive decisions, and in digital transformation. We also saw there was an impact on value, really being able to show that return on investment from data and analytics strategies. And organizations that saw budget increase were more often led by CDOs leading or heavily involved in digital transformation. That should be key, right? So if you can highlight the screen, organizations, I'm going to just repeat it, organizations that saw a budget increase were more often led by the CDOs, right? Those data analytics leaders that were leading or heavily involved in digital transformation. So there's definitely a bridge here between leading the data value, data and analytics value, but also digital transformation value. So what else did we look at? So here's the data sharing lens part. CDOs who had business-facing KPIs and multiple business partners had more influence and impact than those that didn't. This data is pretty straightforward for clients of Gartner. It's available on Gartner.com. What we saw was the top 3 objectives of our respondents were, what were they being measured on? They were being measured on data quality, return on investment, and data sharing. And with respect to performance against objectives, the top 3 objectives met successfully, data sharing number 1, which is why I'm skewing this talk today towards the data sharing, because the top 3 objectives met successfully. The number 1 was data sharing, then data quality, then ROI. Why is that important? Because when you share data and you're able to generate more robust analytics and you're able to show and demonstrate and actually drive more value, you have more involvement and potentially more influence. So CDOs that can show they're promoting data sharing, that they've successfully met data monetization goals or an increase in customer experience, KPIs, are more effective with stakeholder engagement and providing enterprise value. That's what our data is showing. So these things, these concepts are intertwined, right? So data sharing, data monetization, customer experience, it's all about the business-facing KPIs. And what our 6 CDO survey showed was that data sharing was a top line KPI, along with other KPIs like data quality and return on investment. We also saw that data and analytics leaders were most likely to work with the CIO and executive management were challenged by the CIO or the CISO, which makes sense, right? You have competing fiduciary duties between security and driving value from data and analytics. So our key finding number 2 is really about how do you generate more influence and impact? And what we saw is that those that could focus on quality, return on investment, and data sharing were having more influence and impact than those who focus on other things. Our last finding from the 6 CDO survey at Gartner was how do you pursue change management and effective communication, collaboration, creativity, and really thinking about people first were overwhelmingly part of the responses. 93% of CDOs reported effective communication, and that's effective communication, not necessarily through technology, but more about people than tech, and thinking about people over technology were driving more successes. So important to think about that hybrid, right? How much is human-centered and how much is tech-centered. So I want to move to what is a highly effective and highly performing CDO? What do they focus on? Well, according to our research, they are measured on things, as I mentioned, data quality, ROI, data sharing, but also cost optimization, control, savings, efficiency, customer experience, meeting regulatory guidelines and meeting regulatory goals, revenue generation, employee experience, risk mitigation, et cetera. So if you look on the left-hand side, what you're being measured on are starting to traverse more towards business-oriented goals and less towards IT goals, right? And then when you look at what was successfully met, of course, number one, which I highlighted before, is increasing data sharing, and then moving to quality and ROI, cost optimization, regulation, efficiency, customer experience, and employee experience. So for those of you that are Gartner clients, if you look at our other research where we talk about what is top of mind for our CEOs and our CIOs, customer experience, employee experience, relationships are so key. And data plays an enormous role in driving better relationships with employees, better relationships with the customers. And what do we mean by better? It's the business benefit as you define it, whether you're a nonprofit, public sector, government, commercial, it doesn't matter. It's about the business benefit, right, that can be generated from data and analytics. So it's interesting to think about this, but as a CDO or a data analyst leader, think about what are your performance goals? What are you being asked to do? What can you also contribute moving forward? How can you be innovative to be more business savvy, to be more focused on the enterprise goals, the organizational goals? How do you drive the most value from data and analytics, and also be involved in digital business? It's a huge undertaking, right? And so hopefully this conference at MIT, and believe me, I wish I were in Boston because that's where I'm from, is absolutely a gem, right? To be able to become more effective at what you're doing. And hopefully next year we can all meet in person, because I'm actually from Boston and I very much enjoy going there. So moving to the survey findings, what are the keys to success? Well, we saw that high performing CDOs really do things at both the organizational level and the team level. At the organizational level, we saw things like innovative product and service development, focusing on the customer, translating customer and business needs into high-value products and services. And then, of course, removing obstacles to data sharing. How can you break down those silos? That's what high-performing CDOs were doing. But what did they do at the team level, right? So I hope you see this trend. You need to be successful at the organizational level and at your team level. And in terms of forthcoming Gartner research and what we're trying to do in the 7 CDO survey is not only look at organization and teams, but what about what's going on at business units, right? How do business units and lines of business contribute to the overall enterprise success? So as a CDO, you have this really interesting matrix, right? You have to be successful for the organization. You have to help meet organizational goals. You have to have a successful team, right? You have to be able to have your team validate and demonstrate your different stakeholder goals. But what about lines of business? How do you organize for successful lines of business to generate those enterprise goals? How do you traverse between the highest level data analytics goals and each individual business goals, right? Because marketing DNA is different maybe from finance, but together they have to work well together. But together as a CDO, you need to be able to fit it into the highest level enterprise strategy. So 6 CDO survey, we talked about organizational levels and team levels. A 7 CDO survey, which I hope many of you will participate in, and I'll have information for it at the end of this talk, really looks at other things. We are looking at what are those success factors beyond organization and team, beyond, the characterizations of a leader. Because as a CDO, you wear many hats and you need many skills. So one of the things we really want to look at is what are the absolute success factors? And that's our goal, right? To help data analytics leaders be more successful. So back to the 6th CDO survey, what are we doing at the team level? What are we seeing? Again, clear business value. That is an absolute must. But also value not just to the organization, but to stakeholders. So people matter. So one of the things that we looked at in the 6th CDO survey is who you challenged most by, right? So who do you work with, but who are you challenged by? Because you have to still be able to provide value, even if you're being challenged by other stakeholders, which, footnote, all the stakeholders have different fiduciary duties to the organization. And so it's natural that there's going to be a conflict, right? Because the chief information security officer, for example, is charged with making sure that the data is secure, right? Protecting the company from risk. That is naturally at odds with a chief data officer that may want to have more access to data, right? To be able to drive more value. So if you think of those conflicts not as a negative, but really as a positive, which is that you have to work together to be able to satisfy the organizational goals of both, right? Because that's the way you drive more value from data, adequate security, but also the right amount of access for driving innovation. So it's a balance. And because of that balance, you need to work well together, right? So you need to work well together with even those roles that challenge you the most. And that goes to your leadership skills. Also something else that Gartner focuses on. How can you be a high-performing leader? Well, some of the things that you can do is you can monetize assets. You can create data products, but you also need to promote a data-driven decision style. You need to be able to promote data literacy. You need to be able to upskill your organization so everyone speaks data, right, in the same way. Everybody can understand each other. Why have communication barriers when you're trying to drive more value from data, right? Should be somewhat intuitive, right, that in order to use data to drive value, you want everybody to be able to speak data. So these are just some of the things that we found for high-performing CDOs. This is completely top level. These are not all of our findings. There's obviously a lot more available on Gartner.com, but these are the things I wanted to call out as we look at, what did we find in our 6th CDO survey, but also what are we looking at in terms of data sharing? So at this point, I am going to switch to the topic of promoting this data sharing and talking about data sharing, driving digital transformation. So what we found here was that effectiveness in communication is definitely important, as is that influence, like I just talked about. But promoting data sharing and breaking down those silos is evidence of engagement and influence. So we are seeing this correlation. So those CDOs that are successful at doing it are actually having more engagement and more success. So what else are we seeing? Enhancing data quality and reliability, not so great. That's going to reduce your influence and success. But data sharing, monetization, and customer experience is going to increase it. So think about that. Data quality absolutely is important, but if you spend too much time on it, you are reducing your influence and your impact compared to focusing more time on data sharing, data monetization, and customer experience. What else did we see? What else are the keys to success? If you meet your objectives on customer experience, and again, I referred to other Gartner research showing customer experience is absolutely key right now. CDOs who successfully met their objectives on customer experience improvement, they were leading DNA teams 2.8 times more likely to be effective at showing that value to the DNA stakeholders, being able to show that demonstrable value, really key. So I hope you can see these synergies between data sharing, data monetization, customer experience, business-facing KPIs, and also focusing on actually increasing that data sharing. Those that were able to increase data sharing both internally and externally were 1.7 times more likely to be effective at showing value to the stakeholders. So here are some keys to success. While data quality is important, focus less on it. What do you need to focus on? Customer experience, data sharing, data monetization, stakeholder engagement. These things are really key to your success and to driving more business value to your organization. So what do we predict? Gartner has lots of predictions. As you probably all know, we just published our top trends. We're about to publish our hype cycles. Part of our prediction showed that by 2023, organizations that promote data sharing will outperform their peers on business value metrics. Now, this is different from kind of more traditional aspects of data sharing, right? And I think originally there were really good reasons to set up data silos in your tech environment and in your people environment and even across your governance. A lot of information was related to valuable intellectual property. A lot of information was proprietary. So it makes sense to silo it and control it and don't disclose it unless there's a reason to. But if you think about modern day data, we're not in that world anymore, right? We are more about that data obviously can still be protected and should be appropriately, but there's so much more value from data that would be locked down if you treated all data the same. So it is important because our research has shown if you promote it, you'll have more engagement and influence, as we just talked about. But the teams are 2 times more likely to generate those benefits if you can share data externally. And those that actually share with their partners, their business partners, are 3 times more likely to show measurable benefit. So the old world of let's not share to protect intellectual property, while that's still an important facet, data means so much more now than confidential information or proprietary information, right? We're able to collect and synthesize not only real data, but also synthetic data and artificial intelligence, right? So the generation of data and the relevance to predictive analytics, it's too big to ignore. And so you need to share data in order to drive that benefit. But it's difficult, right? We all know it's difficult. Why? Well, our research has shown data management can be a roadblock, right? If it's too inflexible, insufficient tools, technologies, roadblocks, including regulatory prohibitions, and of course, security risks, which are valid, but you can't over-secure the data in a way that leads to inefficiencies and devaluing the data. You have to have a balance. Stakeholder resistance based on fear is something we talk to clients about all the time. Afraid of what? Afraid of downstream misuse. It's an appropriate thing to care about, but you can't be overly risk averse, because if you do, you'll fall behind, right? Without that appropriate balance. So we do know though that data sharing is difficult because of different fears across different stakeholders. But one thing that despite its difficulty, we also know that executive leaders know that it is key to digital transformation capability. It really is. And I'm going to stop right at this point because I'm going to transfer over to this digital transformation narrative and see, are there any questions? Does anybody from the MIT group have any questions to share, or should we keep going?
Yeah, Lydia, a couple of questions. They got a few votes. Can you give an example of a business-facing KPI? Is it the ROI of the data infrastructure, data resources, or is it the actual business metrics like sales growth, profits, customer satisfaction? Okay, so I'm going to just flip back to answer that question. So here were the objectives. Here were the key performance indicators. So those that were able to meet data sharing, data quality, ROI, cost optimization, they were able to show that they were meeting their key performance indicators. And cognizant of the fact that if you're measured on data sharing, you may meet that more successfully. But if you look at this over here, this is what was being measured with respect to both data and data strategy. So data quality really coming up top of mind. Yet, so those may have been the highest business-facing KPIs. Yet the other part of our research, as I just showed, is that those CDOs who focused on that were not as successful. So what the KPIs that are important really is increasing data sharing and showing that demonstrable ROI from data sharing. Which makes benchmarking really important, right? Your siloed data moves to non-siloed. Your business objective, whether it's increasing cost optimization, cost savings, generating new revenue, or better decision-making for risk mitigation, how do you know that the return on investment of your analytics led to that? You have to benchmark it early. So really the KPIs, or the KPI analysis is showing less time on data quality as the CDO, that's not as the organization. Of course, data quality is important. You need the right amount of quality for your business case, but that's not the job of the CDO. That's what this is showing. So the KPIs are about strategy and sharing and collaboration and being able to show that return on investment. Okay, that makes sense. These are basically, we're looking at the KPIs here. Yeah. So another question was, why do you think data sharing scored so high? Does it go hand in hand with digital transformation? I mean, people really didn't this wasn't really a topic 2 years ago. I mean, people were, well, it depends how you define data sharing as well, if it's internal or external.
Right. Yeah. So it's fascinating because in our fifth CDO survey last year, we actually had a hypothesis on data sharing. You know, we asked the question, those that share are more successful, and that was confirmed. So for the sixth CDO survey, we didn't ask about data sharing. We asked about KPIs and business-facing KPIs. And out of a whole host of answers, data sharing was just one of many. And so it rose to the top, which I think there's multiple drivers. There are government drivers, right? So we are seeing many countries around the world promoting data and analytics strategies with a common goal of sharing more data. It drives more robust analytics. It also helps companies, entities, governments better train their AI and their machine learning, right? So there's many different drivers in terms of why data sharing is important. We saw in COVID data disclosure being important, but I think pre-COVID, companies were coming together and seeing that they were better off if they shared data even with competitors. So what's been kind of fascinating to watch is the different data sharing consortia around biopharma and in finance and in healthcare and in retail, where we see competitors sharing data in order to derive individual yet stronger predictive analytics, for example. So the reason why I think it's coming to the fore is because there's now a recognition that collaboration with the right amount of data sharing is not only good for industry, but it's good for individual business as well as citizens and consumers. So it's a win-win. Whether it's about sharing data for better risk mitigation around safety, like we see in aviation, or more efficiencies, like we see in supply chain, or whether it's for better customer experience, like we see in retail. It's all about that defined benefit that is common across entities in the industry, including those that are competitors. And when competitors share data for their own individual benefit as well as for market benefit, to me, I think that's the highest level of data sharing that creates the win-win. So it's about a positive spin on data sharing as opposed to trying to be exclusive. So that's my take on it. And we've written a lot of research about, not only the empirical evidence for data sharing, but we're now looking at different industries. So in insurance, for example, better able to mitigate fraud. In finance, better able to detect bad actors before the bad action actually happens. So there's a lot of positive benefits, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's coming to the fore.
The term data sharing implies that people are just voluntarily giving each other data, but is your definition also include purchasing data, which has been going on for decades,
Right.
and now is increasing with the advent of better platforms to do that?
So at Gartner, we define internal data sharing as sharing data between related business units, business operations, as well as entities that are owned and controlled by the same corporation. So sister companies, parent, subsidiary, et cetera, as internal. Really, the focus on increasing internal data sharing is everything from between different business units within one local organization, all the way to across the multiple enterprises owned by one entity or enterprise. External is the opposite. So we define external as not having ownership or control over the entity that's providing the data. And there are different risk assessments, right? Because when you have ownership and control over the organization that's sharing the data, you have a little bit more visibility into collection and governance and quality. When you're taking it from an external, right, you don't have any ownership or control over the legal entity of the organization. And so you have to rely on other kinds of frameworks and governance and legal constructs for those assurances that you're getting the right quality data. So that's the way we define external versus internal. But as our research has evolved, we've also been looking at things like sharing master data management, for example. So there's a terrific new note on Gartner.com about how sharing master data management is the wave of the future for generating more value. We also have it in monetizing in transportation, right? Monetizing data across the transportation ecosystem by sharing data. So the definitions relate to both internal and external based on the ownership of the enterprise, but also how the industry ecosystem can share the data. So a data consortium, for example, would consist of external parties getting together to share data, and then of course ingesting it for their internal use. And then the last thing I would say is that seeing data sharing collaborations is kind of interesting because it sets the groundwork for more technologies and technology that can really enhance trusted sharing. So there's that opportunity for developing data sharing platforms with trust, but at the same time, it also eliminates a third-party intermediary. So for those data sharing collaborations that are using blockchain and smart contracts, you need that platform. You don't need a third party to be able to bring entities together to share the data. So it's kind of interesting what we're seeing, the challenges and opportunities as these ecosystems are developing in order to support data sharing, whether it's external or internal.
Okay, one more question. Do you have time for one more?
We have time for one more and then we'll move on. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So from a former Gartner analyst, Doug Laney wants to know, what are the big changes in the survey results since the first one 6 years ago?
Oh, Doug, really? That's awesome. Well, okay, so a couple of things. One, our respondents numbers are a lot higher. Right now, we are really looking at what is a successful CDO? What are the leadership qualities that you need to do? So it is more about leadership and tales of success, but not just for descriptive purposes, but really to help CDOs learn about what does it mean to have influence and impact. How do you know that you have it? How do you go about having it? What do you need to prioritize in order to have influence and impact? And the CDO needs, and this is what we focus on now, which we did not focus on before. The CDOs that have more influence and impact can drive more value from data and analytics and digital transformation, but they need to be able to show that demonstrable value. And it's from both the data and data monetization, but as well as from analytical value, offset by analytical liability, right? So we look a lot at what's the risk. And so I think in Gartner's 6th CDO survey, we are focusing much more on helping chief data officers balance the multiple priorities that they have and actually trying to come up with a systemic way of saying, these are the things you need to focus on, even though you may be pulled in 16 different directions. This is most crucial now, and then prioritize this second tier. So those are some of the things that I see in the 6th CDO survey. Now, as lead for the 7th CDO survey, Doug, I will say I'm really excited to be leading that following a whole host of amazing Gartner analysts. And what we're going to be focusing on are things like the leadership and also sort of how mainstream this role is now, right? How executive level that it is, treating data as an asset at the enterprise level, but then also balancing with those lines of businesses that need to drive value. And so everybody that's listening to this will have an opportunity to participate in terms of on our 7th CDO survey. And if you go to Gartner.com and put in 7th CDO survey, you should come up with a link where you can participate, and I'll share that with you at the end of this. So with that, and thank you, Doug, great to talk to you virtually. I'm going to move on to why the data sharing is not only important, but more of how to do it. And so what I introduced last year was this Gartner model to reverse that presumption, to flip the don't share data mantra, to really talk about how, you know what, that traditional but outdated, traditional and well-grounded. I mean, I was an attorney for 20 years before I came to Gartner, so well-grounded reasons to protect confidential information, proprietary information, intellectual property, absolutely support that. But you can't treat all data as if it is that high level of proprietariness, right? You need to be able to share data to drive better outcomes, to drive more robust analytics. So that traditional but now outdated don't share unless mindset, it's outlived its purpose, right? It started off with a good purpose, but now we need to modernize. And so this model helps clients share data unless there's a reason not to. And how do you do that? You target business outcomes, you recalibrate risk, you establish trust, very important. You then prepare the people environment and the IT environment, and then you engage in augmented data ecosystems. So targeting business outcomes, what does that mean? Well, we've seen in our research improving business relationships customers, employees, students, patients, citizens, whole host of relationships, franchisor, right? Franchisee, just multiple relationships. That's what it's about. So instead of thinking about data first, think about outcomes, then think about relationships, then think about how data can drive those outcomes to enhance those relationships. That's really the benefit of driving value from data and analytics and helping you as a CDO prove measurable impact. But you have to prioritize. So many inquiries that I take from clients, they can't prioritize. It's too much. It's overwhelming. And I get that because there's so much opportunity with data and analytics. But you have to be able to prioritize to yield maximum alignment with business outcomes. So I like to talk to clients about just focus on three. Is it cost savings, internal facing? Is it net new revenue or net new non-monetary business value creation that's outward facing? Or is it risk mitigation decision making? If you can just focus on those three and where your priorities lay, then that can help you not feel so overwhelmed as a CDO with so much opportunity to drive value from data. And then, of course, you have to embrace collaboration, even among competitors. And I really like to talk to clients about our use cases around competitors that are working together to share data for competitive differentiation, right? It's that counterintuitive positive outcome of sharing data. And we have lots of examples of it. And it's a great win-win, and it's a positive use of data, right? So yes, there's risk, and yes, there can be misuse. But if we embrace collaboration and we work together, we can drive more value, right, for agreed upon outcomes. So resistance to data sharing will derail your digital business transformation is where I come out on this first one of targeting business outcomes. Risk, of course, is important, but focus first. Let's change that narrative. Let's talk about the risk of not sharing data, right? What happens if you don't share it? Are you losing competitive advantage? Are you not able to have robust analytics on equipment failure, for example? And then compare actual risks, not just the perceived ones of sharing data. There's a lot of hype around can't share because you need to unpack that. You need to ask legal counsel and privacy compliance folks, well, tell me about the real risk. Like, I really want to understand it. So rather than coming at it from a combative standpoint, come at it from a curiosity standpoint, right? I want to understand what the risks really are. Then you can have a conversation about the risks of sharing versus the risks of not sharing. And if possible, bring in seemingly inconsistent perspectives, right? So tactical versus strategic, regulatory versus innovative, economic versus non-economic. The more perspectives that you have, the easier it is to identify what the real risks of not sharing data is compared to maybe what a perceived one is. And then, of course, absolutely, decide when it's appropriate not to share. But start with we should share unless there's a reason that we shouldn't. And then you can carve out those specific cases applicable to your industry and your goals. And of course, you can even decide not to share data, even if it's legally permissible to do so or ethically permissible to do so. Of course, that's completely fine. It's about how do you think about data sharing. So think about it in terms of why aren't we sharing it, right? That really helps illustrate the value of data and analytics when you can collaborate and when you can share data both internally and externally. So if you're persistently overly risk averse and you make a lot of decisions not to share data, you know, the research shows you're going to have suboptimal business outcomes and be in losing digital business. So let's not do that, right? Let's focus on data collaboration and data sharing to be able to meet business outcomes and garner digital business. But you can't do it without trust. And at Gartner, we talk a lot about using data catalogs and data quality for trustworthy evaluations. You need to apply the right dimensions, but it's to your use case, right? So you don't want to have too high of data quality for the use case, just like you don't want to overly govern the data for the use case. It's really important to align the trust-based mechanisms to your business use case and to your business outcome. So one of the things that you can do in addition to data quality metrics and data catalogs is use your agreements for different representations and warranties. Pass-through customer opt-ins is key. Talk to your lawyers about that because you need to align permitted data uses, especially when it's personal data, with your business purpose. And if you're acquiring data from an external source, you need to have assurances that customers have opted in that you and others are going to be able to use it aligned with that business purpose, right? So kind of legal 101, important to have a relationship with your legal counsel so that you can understand how you can best use data to drive value. And then, of course, adopting responsible AI to mitigate that risk of nefarious uses, right? It's out there. It's always been out there. It's not new. But with advances in technology and with data sharing platforms, there's you do need to focus on mitigating the risk of downstream misuse, particularly when you can't control it, right? So that's why that internal versus external definition is so key around the legal enterprise control. So one of Gartner's predictions is through 2023, organizations that can instill digital trust will be able to participate in 50% more ecosystems, expanding revenue generation, right? So that's that outward-facing business goal, revenue generation. Similarly, you can think about instilling digital trust to participate in the ecosystems of expanding your cost optimization, right? Or your internal-facing cost savings. And similarly, you can look at how would it help better risk mitigation? How would it help decision making to make better risk decisions, to be able to better understand what the risks are to your organization? And I don't mean data risks, I mean operational risks to your company. So really important part here is the trust-based mechanism. Then you need to prepare your environment. Of course, we talked about this, breaking down silos, showing how, in particular, to some skeptical stakeholders that there's regulatory support for data sharing. Another reason to be friends with your general counsel. There's a lot of regulatory support for data sharing. And actually, asking your legal team to illustrate losses that could happen when data isn't accessible would be a really fun exercise, right? Just to kind of collect those use cases of when you don't share data or when data is not accessible, what are the losses from that legal and regulatory standpoint? I think you would be surprised to see how loss can easily be created by having that inaccessibility. And then, of course, building a data-driven enterprise, actively share data, not overly controlling it. And there are emotional barriers to sharing data, right? There is a fear that if data is shared, that there'll be risk of harm or risk of exposure or showing a lack of performance, right? But as a CDO, you need to be aware of the emotional barriers and address them before you're mandating opening up the data more, right? You need to be able to make sure that the people are comfortable with opening the data for more internal sharing aligned to a business case. So listening is really important before you would embark on that. So that's part of your job, right? As a CDO, you have to foster a data sharing culture. It's not data ownership. It's certainly not a fiefdom. It's sharing. It's a sharing culture. Why? Because you're driving the same business goals and your roles, your executive roles, your stakeholder roles are more successful with your sharing of data. So preparing the environment with adaptive governance and shifting away from command and control, also part of our rubric here, and also adaptive governance, the right governance to deliver the right business outcomes, and engaging in the augmented data ecosystem. So that is our data sharing model at Gartner. And I'm going to just briefly mention that we also have research on promoting data sharing as a business necessity. And I'm going to end with lending your voice to the Gartner CDO survey. And I'm also going to ask Wayne if is there time for other questions, or can I spend a minute on the 7 CDO survey?
Oh yeah, we have time. It's only like we have about 10 minutes.
Perfect. Okay. So with the 7 CDO survey, what we are really looking at is helping CDOs gain more insights so that y'all can be successful. And we would value your voice. It's a really long URL here, and I did think about doing the tiny URL, but it didn't look very good on the slide. And so that is a very long sign up, but for anybody that's interested in information about it, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat with you about participating in our 7 CDO survey. It does open in September. And right now we are working on collecting interest at this URL. So for those of you that are interested and could contribute, we would really value your participation. The insights that we garner really help everybody. So kind of along that same theme of collaborating, lending your voice uplifts everybody, right? So that's a positive. And with the last few minutes here, unless there are any questions, I did want to focus a little bit on our strategic planning assumptions. We just published our top predicts in data and analytics. Data sharing is a top trend in data sharing as a program in government. So we are seeing governments really trying to derive more value from data by making data more accessible across departments, across different agencies. I can't tell you how many calls I've had where, government CDOs just say, we're so frustrated, our business purpose is frustrated because we don't have the right data, we can't access it, other agencies aren't sharing it. So we are really seeing that being able to share data, whether you're a government or non-governmental entity, will release some of that frustration and be able to help entities arrive at their business goals. But you have to include external data. So one of our predictions is by 2023, 85% of sharing strategies will include external data sources to derive revenue generating digital business outcomes rather than data management functions. So data sharing is an essential business capability. And that is the research that I'm working on in addition to the CDO survey, which is data sharing is a business capability. And sharing data, unless there's a reason not to, should be your default. It should be your mantra. And 50% of government organizations, we think, will be starting to form accountability structures for data sharing, including data structure, quality, and timeliness. So there's a lot of research on Gartner.com on some of these strategic planning assumptions, as well as our top trends. And a word on the business necessity. The reason I want to promote it as a business necessity is because think about the insights that would not otherwise be discoverable unless you had that aggregation of data from multiple sources, right? Being siloed in your data sources leads to siloed outcomes. So data insights are stronger with more relevant data. It's not about big data, but it's about the right kind of data. So it can even be small data, but it is about small but more relevant, right? Rather than big and less relevant. And so aggregation of data from multiple sources is key when it's the right data. And why do you need the right data? Well, you need the right data not only for the questions that you know to ask of the data, but you need the right data because of the ability of graph analytics to identify non-obvious relationship awareness. So when you don't know the insights in the data, when you want to know the unknowable relationships, you really do need to have the right kind of data from multiple sources in order to show those non-obvious relationship awareness insights to help you drive your business outcomes. So it's less about the data and more about where are you going with it, right? What's that alignment and how can you close that gap to have that tighter alignment between the analytics and the business goal? And if you don't have the right data, if you're not sharing data or you're not discovering the right data from multiple sources, then you're starting off from a less advantageous position than those that are, right? Those that share are faring better according to our research. So this is about driving more robust insights and analytics, and of course, increasing the speed of acceleration of business transformation and digitization. So digital business success is requiring the right data at the right time to produce those right insights. If you don't have that, it falls flat. So hopefully you can see these connections between our CDO survey, our 5th and 6th CDO survey focused on data sharing, the 5th intentionally, the 6th unintentionally, but also showing data sharing as really a business necessity to have that success in digital business. So being able not so much to have the volumes of data, but to have the right kind of data because you're trying to align your data and data analytics strategy to a measurable business outcome, to produce value, which in turn then augments the CDO role, right? The data and analytics leader role to have more influence and have more impact, which is what our entire CDO survey was about regarding digital transformation, as well as people skills over technology skills. So we hope that you do participate in our 7th CDO survey. Happy to chat with anybody via LinkedIn or email. And thank you so much to the MIT group. And hopefully next year we can all meet in person. I would really very much enjoy that. And Wayne, I'll turn it over to you for any last minute contributions.
Sure, great. Great job, Lydia. Couple more questions. Here's an interesting one. Is there formal data training for lawyers? I often build a quote unquote legal advisor into a data governance organization, but they often have little data knowledge until they meet me.
Okay, great question. Fantastic question. So, I think that lawyers today have a lot more skills that need to be sharpened in addition to understanding the law and legal reasoning and how to advise clients appropriately. And in data and analytics, I think it's an imperative for lawyers to learn whether you're in litigation or corporate law, because the data is the center of so many of our interactions and of corporate transactions. So while I'm not aware of data training, at Gartner, we do have several key initiatives that focus on legal leaders and general counsel. So we do have some research to help legal leaders be better at data and analytics. And quite often when I'm talking to a CDO in our inquiries, I actually ask, are you talking to your general counsel about this? What's their maturity level? So before you can even think about training, I think it's important to assess the legal team's maturity level with data and data literacy. So how literate are your general counsel, right? So kind of a key stakeholder to be able to have successful data analytics programs. You want your legal leaders to understand data and be able to speak data, not only so that they draft better contracts to protect your organization's interest, but so that they can also help with the business goals, as well as protect from risk, right? So it actually helps the legal leader if the more they know about data and data literacy. So while I don't know of any of the formal training, it's definitely something we focus on, but also something that I think is really important as the responsibilities of your legal counsel are changing. And as a data analytics leader and a chief data officer, whether you're monetizing personal data or aggregated data or synthetic data or artificially created data or whatever kind of data it is, you need to be able to have a relationship with your legal counsel to understand the opportunities and the risks. We have seen so many instances of missteps, right, that could have provided for an innovative data value generation in a contract, but nobody knew about it. All right, so I think the maturity level, when it's low, provides for a lot of opportunity for success, and then move to the training and data literacy would absolutely be a start.
Great. Well, that takes us up to the top of the hour. So Lydia, again, thank you very much. And to our audience, thank you for listening. Thank you for asking questions. And we have a 15-minute break now before the next session. Is that right? Yeah. Well, it's actually more of a half an hour break. So I guess they're getting more generous as the day goes on. Take care, everyone.